Today we're in the studio and I'm going to show you how to make an epic terrarium using all these raw materials. I'll go step by step and show you exactly what you need to do. Step 1, the vessel. I put this as the very first step because I think this is the most important. It's important that you find a vessel that fits your space and that brings you joy every time you look at it. So that's why I think it's so important. There's several places that you can source one. You can get it in an antique store, a garden center, a thrift store, or even something that you already have. Something to keep in mind when you're looking for a vessel is to have a good height to it, because you want some room for your plants to grow. I have even gotten these jars from Walmart, which I think they start the largest one at $24. And then you can go all the way down to the smaller one, which is $6. And they have big opening at the top and very easy to assemble. Step 2, the plants. Now, I usually get mine at a garden center, but I did a little experiment and I ordered from a couple online places. And I had about 50-50 success rate. This shipment right here was success. All the plants showed up, they were in great shape, and the only downside was a couple of them were succulents, which are not great plants for a closed terrarium. So something to keep in mind when you're ordering. These ferns I ordered and they shipped them with a heat pack, and this time of year it's winter where I am, so half of them, more than half of them, showed up dead or wilted or in really bad shape. So that was a fail. This one I was very excited to get. It's a tiny oak leaf vine that you can see these are two different vendors that I got them from. One showed up in great shape. The other one showed up in really bad shape. But I did get a total refund for my purchases that did show up in bad shape. So that was a good thing. Another place you can source is your local box store. These were tiny orchids that were just under $8, and they're fantastic to put in terrariums. Most garden centers have a section of little tiny plants that they call terrarium plants, and the only ones you'd want to steer clear of are succulents. And of course you're going to need your moss. And we sourced it together last week. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link below. So here's some of the plants that I sourced, and the thing that I keep in mind with when I'm looking for plants is a variety in height, a variety in texture, and a variety in color. One thing you can do is source larger plants and just divide them and use just a section of the plant. Step 3, the decorative. This step is optional, but I think is a necessary key component to adding that important vibe that speaks to you and only you. You can find these items in nature. Some of my favorite are rocks and shells. Another favorite of mine is ceramic. Because your terrarium is going to be moisture loving environment, you need to think about something that won't degrade in the moisture, and ceramic is a perfect one for that. And so are little figurines with metal. They seem to do really well also. I also like these little figurines of animals that are plastic. Now these are little metal trellises that mimic what you see in a larger garden. These plastic plants are great fillers, and what I use them for is if a plant dies or fades away, you can fill it in with one of these until you get a new plant. These moss-covered rocks are also another great option. A great place to source your decorative items is the Goodwill or the thrift store. If you look in the bag section, you can often find great sources here. Keep in mind while you're sourcing for these figurines or items, the size of your vessel, because you don't want to take up valuable plant space with too big of a figurine. The theme of my terrarium is Garden of Eden, so I was looking for an Aphrodite sculpture and I couldn't find one, but I found this little angel and I wanted to make her look like ceramic. So I painted her white and then I put a protective matte coating on top of her. I also had the vision of my Garden of Eden having flying birds. So I used some paper clay and I sculpted some birds and I put them on some metal skewers so that I could stick them inside the dirt and have them fly. I thought they turned out fantastic, and if you're interested in seeing a video on the whole process of how I made these, let me know. Leave a comment below. Step 4, the foundation. You're going to want to start out with a layer of rocks. These can be any rocks, but usually I like the smaller ones, and I love the white. Then you're going to need a layer of charcoal. You can get these items at your local garden center or online. I will leave a link below to anything that I bought online. Then you're going to want a layer of dirt. I just use regular potting soil. Step 5, the build. You want to start out by washing your container really well. My vessel was an old pickle jar and I sourced it from an antique store. It had this handle on it and I didn't want it on there, so I removed it. A great idea is to use a little stencil, and that's the size of your vessel, and then line your plants up so you can get a good visual on what your plan is for when you put them in the terrarium. This gives you the spatial idea and the textures and the different heights that you're going to use. I tried several different plants and several different setups until I got it just how I wanted it. Usually your terrarium has a back and a front side, so your back side of your terrarium should have your taller plants and the front side should have the shorter ones. Another thing you're going to want to do is to moisten your soil. You don't want it dripping wet, you just want it damp so that it clumps. Also, you should water your plants and let them sit overnight and drain so that they're not sopping wet, but they're well watered. Same thing with your moss. You want to wet it down and get it nice and moist. So like I said, I sourced this pickle jar and it didn't have a top. So what I found was an old compote, and I'm going to use the top as the sealer for this. And that's an option you can use. And here's another version I did. I sourced this at a plant center and it didn't have a top. So I just used a clear bowl and it works perfectly fine. The first layer we're going to add is the rocks. I usually put a half to an inch, depending on the size of my vessel. I leave a hole in the middle so that I can add more dirt and give more room for my plants to grow. Now, something I didn't do was to water my charcoal, and I made a mess inside my jar. So I would recommend for you to water down your charcoal before you place it into your vessel. You're just going to add a thin layer of the charcoal and then your dirt. Again, you're going to want about a ½ inch to an inch, depending on how much you can get away with. I've got about an inch here. Now this plant, you can see it's not a miniature or terrarium size, so I am going to divide it and just put the smaller version inside my terrarium. If you use an orchid in your terrarium, it usually comes in a little clear pot. I like to leave it in that and put it in my terrarium in the pot. If you need to water it later on, then it has a vessel that you can easily just add the water to that rather than your whole terrarium. When you're putting your plants in, you want to make sure you remove most of the soil from the bottom of the plant. And then you can put dirt back in around your plants as needed. Here I'm adding little stones, like a little walkway, and I want to put my figurine on top of the stones. So it's good if you take your fingers or your hand and pat down the dirt so it gives it a flat surface to put it on. Once I have all my plants planted, now I'm going to put the moss in and around the plants. I love these little button mosses. They just look like little toadstools, and they're my favorite to forage and use in terrariums. Now I wanted to talk about the purpose of all these layers. The rocks are for drainage, and the charcoal is to filter the air and the water that is the ecosystem of your terrarium. What happens is the water will condensate on the glass and then rain down on your terrarium. And this cycle will repeat over and over and create a perfect atmosphere for your plants to thrive. My love for terrariums started back when I was a little girl, and I created my very first terrarium with my grandma Sarah at our cabin in the mountains, using only found objects in the forest. So I just want you to understand that it's not all about the items you put in your terrarium. It's more about creating a little world, a little ecosystem that you can bring into your surroundings that remind you of the things that you love, so that every time you look at it, it brings you a sense of serenity. If you keep that in mind when you're sourcing your vessel, your plants, your decorative items, then it will all come together like magic. Step 6. Care and maintenance. Once you finish your terrarium, you should water it, but don't overdo it. You don't want it to be sopping wet. The first week or two of your terrarium's life is its adjustment phase. Condensation is a natural occurrence in your terrarium and is a good thing. but too much will overwhelm your plants and not make for a long-term ecosystem. So the first couple of weeks of your terrarium's existence, you should keep an eye on it, and when the condensation is overwhelming on the glass, open up the top and let it air out. Put the lid back on and repeat this process until there's minimal condensation. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. On the right side, that's too much condensation, so you would want to open your vessel and let it air out. And this one has just the right amount of condensation. If you get this step right, your terrarium can become maintenance free for a very long time. You shouldn't have to water your terrarium if it is a closed one, but if your vessel is not airtight, you may need to water it. So just keep an eye on it, which is the fun part because it's so beautiful after all. Now I really wanted to illuminate my Garden of Eden, so I found this light at Ikea. And it's just a little round light, and it's very lightweight and perfect for what I needed. It just has a little on-off switch. So all I did was drape it over the top and put the lid on. My initial idea was to use a glue stick to attach the light to the top of the dome, but I discovered I don't have a glue stick, so until that time, I just did this temporary solution. Before I leave you, I wanted to give you a bonus, a small and easy terrarium that you can do. I got these lucite containers from Amazon, and I pre-moistened some sphagnum moss and put a thin layer on the bottom. And then I just used the varying textures and colors of the moss and created these little abstract paintings with the moss. I made sure to moisten the moss really well and then close the lids. And I keep an eye on them for a little while to make sure the moisture level is what it needs to be. And that's it. These are perfect for somebody who has limited space or just wants a carefree little terrarium to bring that pop of green into your space and surroundings any time of year. I wanted to thank you for watching, and I hope I inspired you to bring nature inside and surround yourself with the things that you love.